Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to take a few seconds here to let people enter the stream. We're so glad you can be here today on this Wednesday evening at 7. As you'll notice, the light is slowly encroaching on my face. So, hopefully I'm not completely enveloped by it in the literal sense, but in the metaphorical. I hope that it, washes over me. Thank you again for joining. We're just going to take a few more seconds here to let people come in and tune into the program. I can see we have some people in already, so just going to take a few more secs. Great. Thank you once again for taking your time on this Wednesday, 7 o'clock. People are out there showing appreciation for frontline workers right now. My name is Marco Cheruvia. I am the founder of the Existence Project and the host of this podcast program called Up Close. We have a really exciting episode. I think it's one of the coolest episodes we're going to do this season. And we got a lot of cool ones coming up. So thank you all once again for being here and watching. Reminder that if you want to help get the spread of this post out there, you can like and share it around with your community right now. It'll help get it out to more people. And as I begin, generally with the Existence Project, we speak a lot to the experience of homelessness, and that can look a lot of different ways for different people. But generally, it does speak to an experience beyond just not having a home. It speaks to a lack of connection to place, a lack of connection to belonging, identity, and stable community. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the territory of the Esquimalt and Songhees Nation, the Lekwungen-speaking people, and that they, along with many other Indigenous folks in Canada, were made homeless through the process of colonization on their own lands. The cities that we live in, the institutions that we take part in, wouldn't be possible without the displacement of those people. And I don't know about you, but for me, my story includes a reckoning with that truth and a will to heal and contribute to that healing in a modern context. So here we go with the EP introduction. So Up Close, welcome. For those of you that missed us last time, this is a live stream, an interactive live stream, where we examine issues facing the street community through the lens of people on the front lines of homelessness. We speak to people that are experiencing it currently, folks that are supporting people, and people that are creating policy that directly impacts those that are on the street. It's an interactive place, so it's going to be a spot for you guys to go ask questions throughout. And there's going to be ways for you to help if you feel inspired to from this experience. We have a really, really exciting episode coming up, but before we get there, there's a few things I want to go over. I just wanted to touch base real quickly on the last episode that we had. So we had a really amazing conversation with someone named Kay Martin, and we're going to see a graphic come up here. Kay Martin is a peer support worker. She works with the Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness. And we were speaking with her a little bit about what is the reality facing people in hotels right now during the crisis, the COVID crisis, that is. We're at a bit of an unprecedented time where, because this is a public health issue, people are being housed at a bit of an unprecedented rate, and there's actually a political will to do it. After the show, we had a volunteer who was watching, Lisa Aurora from getthepicture.ca, made this infographic encapsulating all of our conversation into one spot. So if you are interested in having access to this, the video is available. The full video is available on our Facebook page. We also have an image that you're seeing right here that can be used. It's a great resource if you're reaching out to communities and you want to provide some accessible information. If you're an advocacy group, if you're a teacher, either university, high school, this might be a really interesting tool for you to use. That's all available on our Facebook. And please check it out if you have a chance. And so just giving ourselves 1 sec here to come back. So how does the live stream work? So at a basic level, you're going to have an opportunity to hear from someone. Today we're speaking with David Arthur Johnston, this incredible man who pioneered this movement called the Right to Sleep. You, the audience, are able to ask questions whenever you feel like it. My main woman, Mira, is on the sidelines. For those of you that don't know her, she is the other half of this project, and she'll be paying attention to everything that's being commented on. And we're going to be looking for comments specifically relating towards the topic being discussed. And today that's going to be the right to sleep and alternative housing solutions. So you'll see what that's going to look like. You can also make nice comments, ideally some jokes, but not too many. If you want to wisecrack at me, I'll accept a couple, but don't go too far. I'm looking at you. You know who you are. Another thing just to say, last thing before we jump into this, community agreements. So we're going to be looking out for respectful language. There's no hate speech, bullying, any kind of discriminatory talk is not going to be allowed. You'll be kicked out of the stream, and that includes creating a place where there's respect for the guests that we're speaking to, ourselves, myself, the host, and the other viewers that are in there. The community agreements are going to be in the comments section, so feel free to check those out if you need to. All right, so without further ado, today is a really special day, actually, and for a lot of people, it was a very momentous day. It's May 20th, and that was a date that was set by the government to tell folks that were sleeping in the different tent cities around town that it was time for them to move. This morning, I went down to Pandora and I saw what that looked like in person. It was quite a scene. It was quite an exodus of people, and there was a lot of different things happening. There were people that were being moved into housing, this transitional housing for the first time. There were people that didn't want to leave. There were people that were being relocated to other places. And we're going to delve more into that and how that relates to what we're talking about today with the right to sleep. The man I'm talking to today, David Arthur Johnston, became a recognized figure across communities during the 2008 Right to Sleep campaign that saw his arrest and eventual trial lead to a landmark ruling that allowed people to sleep in tents in public parks overnight right here in Victoria. That ruling has been replicated across countries and across cities across Canada. He's now homeless by choice, and he has not used money for over 15 years. That's right, 15 years. He's going to join us tonight to share his insights on his experience with the Right to Sleep campaign, as well as provide some alternative ideas about the future of housing for people experiencing homelessness in our community. All right, let's let David in. Hello, David. How you doing?
Really well. I did want to say that I've been outside for 20 years. I haven't used money in 17 years, and it wasn't about a choice.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that clarification. So before you came to this stage of life for yourself, you were someone who loved comics, you loved video games, and you were a big fan of the book Dune. Can you talk a bit about what early life was like for you?
I wouldn't necessarily say I loved comics. I just had an opportunity when I was young to get thousands of them. And so they were in my life. I learned to speak pop culture at a young age.
They were okay. You had access to thousands. So what was that earlier life like for you? What was that stage of your life like?
Well, I imagine average. As far as we were always under the poverty line, always really poor. Mom worked really hard. She was gone every second week working at a general store out by Rocky Mountain House. And so since I was 12, I had the house to myself every second week, growing up in the country near Black Falls, which is near Red Deer, Alberta.
And now here we are in the present day, and you haven't used money for over 15 years, like you said, and you haven't had permanent housing for longer, and that's all by choice. Can you speak a bit to the difference in yourself from the person you were before you started that trek to what you are now?
I must stress that it wasn't about choice. That the experience that life gave me led me down this path. But as far as me going from nice, average high school dropout to dedicated monk, it was led to. Like I watched Gandhi. I always had somewhat of a talent for observation. When I was 8, I'll tell you this story. When I was 8, I was having nightmares, and it occurred to me that if I thought of the most scariest things I could think of before I went to sleep, that my nightmares couldn't compare. And it worked. And from that moment on, I always had a clinical view of everything. Uh, mayhaps, bordering on sociopathic behavior, but not quite. There was always just traumas never got me the way they got average people.
Okay. And in the modern context, how do you survive? Like, how does so you don't use money and you don't have a house. So how do things like food and that come to you?
Karma, I say as a sort of an overreaching answer. I am a rare character, and it's good to remember that, because someone just jumping into this path would probably not have the same karma that I've had. I've been very lucky, and there's something to when you don't use money. It's a lot easier to make friends, just because people know that you don't want their stuff, and so there's a whole level of a lot less anxiety than is normal when you're meeting someone for the first time.
Great. And I want to get there and talk about that relationship to money and housing. And I also just want to clarify for folks, David is being lent the house of a friend of his, and that is why he is in a house right now. Otherwise, he and I usually have conversations outside near his tent. And so one of your first times experiencing homelessness was here in Victoria at StreetLink, that's now known as Rock Bay Landing. And so what was it like for you back then? What was your mentality going into that place? And what was the community like around StreetLink?
The mentality was confidence for confidence's sake. Like, I really had no idea what I was getting into, but at the same time, it was the best option. And so I just went in it with as much politeness and competence as I could. And I seem to have always been good at patience, and so those qualities make it easier for getting along in those situations. StreetLink was much less intense than Rock Bay is now. Like, there definitely has been an escalation of that sort of street life, whatever, in the last 20 years, almost like it's doubled or quadrupled.
Right. We have a question coming in around the homeless community in today's injunction we're going to bring up here. What is the reality for many in the homeless community with the injunction actions taken by the city today?
Oh, gosh. Well, the reality is the city, just almost everything it does, people just are giving it less and less respect. Like, the city, it says it's doing things and then doesn't do it, and then it becomes obvious that it was part of an official strategy. And so the city threatens arrests, and then gets right to the point where most of the people are gone because of the threats of arrest, and then the people that are still there, they won't arrest them and say that, we forgot, we needed an enforcement order to go with this injunction, and so they'll delay it again.
Right. So you remain unaffected by it right now?
Mostly. Yeah, just the considerations of where I'm at now, and if people are going to be coming there, and what that would look like, and can such a thing as a dry space exist outside in public? Right.
Great. Thank you for the question, Stuart. So going back to this experience with homelessness, so you were involved in some of the very first 10 cities in all of Canada, and you had a squat in 2002 that you did at the legislature building. Can you talk a bit about what was the driving force behind that and what you're hoping to achieve?
Well, 2002 was, oh, people will like this one. It was set up and run by Ben Izzett, current city councilor. He was helping facilitate a protest of university students for tuitions were raised or something along those lines. But about 4 days into this tent city protest being initiated by the university, I saw that they could use my help. And I went over and asked if they would mind, and they said, no, please. And I was a bit bold, and well, they had a big sign saying Camp Campbell as the name of the camp. And I made a sign about 3 times bigger called Camp Freedom, and I put it right in front of the Camp Campbell sign. So I don't know if there was, I like to think of it as some sort of divine co-opting or something along those lines. I saw that right away. You saw that it wasn't necessarily only going to be a protest about student tuitions.
Right. And what did you want it to be about?
Well, I wasn't protesting at that point. I was just, well, not officially. I was just asserting the right to act conscientiously. And I saw that there was lots of action, and I imagine if few people don't know exactly what those situations are like. You have a number of people, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 people, all undulating it, coming through and back and forth, and some people stay, and outside people and comments. It's a very active situation. And with that comes instigators, maybe not so much professional provocateurs, but also professional provocateurs. There's just a lot of people will use a situation like that to voice their resentments at a harsh world, and they'll just put all of their animosity towards that because it's an easy target.
And you also found,
so I went there.
Sorry to interrupt you, but you also found a really strong community there, right? Like that was kind of an unprecedented leap in community for you. Like you mentioned to me, this man, Jason, that you met there. Can you speak a bit about the community that exists at that place?
There's something about it. It acts like a magnet for all the people who care the most. And so you get rarely seen collections of brilliant, ingenious people in all different aspects and diversity and whatnot disciplines. And so it becomes a real example of how tent cities have a life of their own. And then there's a very much you don't stress about maintaining it so much as just enjoy looking for a place where you can help. And so it's quite a phenomenon. The tent cities, once they become popularized, people will see that they're much more than what the newspapers have been presenting them as.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and we're going to get into that in a sec. We have a question coming up about relationship with police. So this is Steve Woolrich, and thank you, Steve. Have you found that most police officers are respectful of your situation, or is there a lot of room for improvement?
For me personally, in the beginning, when I was still a bit of a rookie, there was always the professional attempts at instigation. I learned not to take them personally. And then over time, as my reputation grew and most of the police knew who I was, a strange phenomenon. Like there was something in the idea that I was gaining a reputation where I was a peaceful fella and I couldn't hate. I can't hate, no matter how devastatingly ridiculous someone could be. I know too much to hate. And so with that, there's a strange phenomenon where people can't hate something that can't hate you. And so the instigation eventually just stopped. It became more embarrassing for them to attempt to push those buttons because those buttons simply don't exist. And so, yeah, the police are good. I've made a couple good acquaintances. I am not under the common police. I don't have a hate on for the police. I see them as ridiculously important, and it's more a matter of the political nature of this town and most towns in the Western world. There's a fine line between constitutional protection and just doing it unofficially like good old boys.
That's a strong statement, that you can't hate something that can't hate you, that doesn't hate you. I think that's really important. I bet that applies beyond just the police umbrella as well.
Oh, it's a full-on foundation of martial arts. That if someone knows you can't hate them, then you declaw their rage, essentially. I'm pretty sure it's exactly what Jesus was talking about when he said, turn the other cheek.
Thank you for that question, Steve. I know we have a few more questions, but I want to keep going with the conversation here. So you had an awakening here in Victoria. You said June 2003 was the last time that you used money. And can you talk a bit about what led to that awakening and what is the driving force now that you have it?
Oh gosh. Well, it's sort of to tell the whole story of my life, and so I'll attempt to summarize. On June 28th, 1997, I had what I call my enlightenment, essentially seeing that the universe was a singularity. And then after that, there was a year of shock, and then I came to Victoria in 2000. I had a little book with my thoughts in it I was trying to sell, but essentially was surviving on $20 a month plus whatever GST that I would pull in. And so for me, stopping using money was easier than most people would conventionally think. Like I wasn't paying rent at the time when I stopped using money. Like the only thing I was using money for was food and cigarettes and coffee and pot. And it just got to a point where I knew I could find those things without money, or at least I wasn't as so dependent on those things to maintain my use of money. Like I basically saw that a dependence on money generally is a bad thing for a civilization or a culture or a planet to do. And I was in a position, and I saw that someone needed to do it. And so I did. And it's taken my whole life. And sometimes there's no regrets, but there's very much a sense of sacrifice. Like I don't get to have a normal man's life. And so hopefully I can pull off a miracle and enjoy some sort of crazy soap opera. But beyond that, I enjoy my character.
Let's talk a bit about that. Let's talk about, you haven't had a normal man's life, and that's really true. You've done some very momentous things in your life, and that commitment that you did there led to the Right to Sleep campaign. And your name is the one that is on the affidavit that gave people the right to sleep overnight in parks. So can you speak to us a little bit about that story? How did it start? Where were you? How did it progress? Who was involved, and what was the end result?
Well, first I would like to say that there were 8 or 9 named defendants who had affidavits that are named on the disposition for the Right to Sleep case that came out in 2008. It started with a nice monkish character who only ever meditated and conscientiously slept under a tree, went to bed one night, put his blanket down, laid down, and smelled something horrible. And I got up and I just passed it off as, oh, I put my gear down in some poop, bird poop. It was very, very distinctly, it smelled like chicken poop. And so I just passed it off and I went back and the next night and it was there again. And then I went back a couple nights later and it was a different spot. And so there was like I don't think it was solely targeting me, but it was partially targeting me. The city was putting, is that a tell? It's not really tell, my head is itchy. The city was putting ground up fish fertilizer on known sleeping spots, and subsequently entangled itself with me, and that sort of putting shit where I slept is exactly why tents are legal now.
So what was the process from there? So the city started using this weird methodology of really literally putting shit where you were sleeping. You organized a squat soon after that, correct?
Well, I not so much a squat. I was calling it a tent city or hoping to initiate a tent city, but what really happened is on the 16th of January 2004, by then I'd put out flyers and all over the place, and a bunch of people that were sleeping outside of StreetLink came down and set up their tents, and I set up my tent down at St. Anne's Academy in the treed area. And it was a spectacle. There were cameras and police and people stood their ground, and it was really beautiful to watch. And then the next morning, everyone leaves except me. And then I just started sleeping under a tree. Was there for one night or two nights before the first, they aren't calling them arrests, detainments. The first time they took me into cells for whatever they call it, the same thing they do for a drunk and disorderly. It's there's no paperwork involved. You just put them in there and let them go. That just started a crazy 8-month adventure where I ended up getting arrested 60 times in a 4-month period. And that's not exact. I'm trying not to exaggerate. It is quite high. With adventure after adventure, literal torture, which was interesting. They didn't let me sleep. They'd stand above my head clapping their hands and whatnot, along with beautiful things, as in the partner or the fellow that worked with the fellow clapping his hands above my head, his wife sent tea in a blanket. And so there was very much there's something different going on here. And so after 8 months, I was tired and I knew I needed to get in front of a judge. And so I took 2 giant garbage bags of shredded paper and decorated the entire backyard, what they call the novitiate garden behind St. Anne's, with shredded paper. And that did the trick. So a week after that or so, they arrested me for mischief. And then a lawyer volunteered pro bono. I don't know if he was helping, trying to control the case or direct it, or if he was a friendly, genuine, or if he was slightly whatever. He was a nice enough fellow. And it just started this process of going to court, getting a sentence, getting out, not signing conditions, them releasing me anyway, breaking those conditions, going back, having a longer sentence, just going to jail for a day, 3 days, 4 days, because it's always 2/3 of your time. I don't know if people know normal jail rules or not, but you do 2/3 generally of what they give you. So I do 4 days for getting sentenced for a week, and then I get sentenced for 10 days and sentenced for well, I do 10 days and then I do 20 days and 20 days and 10 days. And then the last big one was a 36-day, well, it was actually a 7th-month sentence. But by the 36th day, I successfully made an appeal, and then they found error in the judge's ruling. And so they let me out. And I don't know if, I don't eat while I'm in jail. So that was an interesting practice.
So you were fasting the entire time. You're released from jail. What's the result? What's happening now? What are the ramifications for our society?
From what point?
Let's talk 2008 here.
2008?
Yeah. So when the decision was made, so you've been going through this process, you're getting sent off to jail numerous times, but you have a court case going.
Yeah, and then lots of little anecdotes and side adventures with that court case. One interesting one is in 2007, in an attempt to make the court case go away, the city removed the word loitering from all of its bylaws and park bylaws, in the hopes that they could go to a judge and say, look, we removed loitering, so you can now drop this case. But they didn't. So that's why you're not seeing the word loitering in official bylaws anymore. Beyond that, no one expected the judge to do the right thing, the justice at this point, the Supreme Court justice. But she did. The case was made. There were 2 lawyers we had, which brought basically 2 experts. One, a doctor who said, if you don't sleep, you're going to die, because judges can't presume that, apparently. And a survival expert that said to get a proper sleep, you need at least a taut covering above you and a ground pad of some sort. And from that, surprisingly, the judge Justice Carol Ross, came out with a disposition that struck the city's unconstitutional or charter violative bylaws. And for 3 days, in October 14th, 2008, when the ruling came out, for 3 days after that, there was no camping bylaws in Victoria. And then 3 days, well, we set up tents and whatnot in Mayor's Grove. And then 3 days after, the city comes out with, I think it was right on an election too, like Dean Fortin, I think, was there. But they came out with this policy on advisement from the Crown, or the whatever Attorney General's office. They made a policy that it was 7 to 7. You could sleep during the night, but you were still prohibited from sleeping during the day, implicitly.
So I have a question. So this started as a municipal thing. You were working, the court case was against the city with the city bylaws, and it went the whole way up to the Supreme Court by the end of it. Is that correct?
Not the Supreme Court of BC.
Got you.
And the precedent was specifically for Victoria, but at the same time, it was a precedent. And so anywhere in the Commonwealth, basically, and also in the States, this precedent can be used to challenge what unconstitutional bylaws they might have.
Wow. On that note, we have a question about the 7 to 7 bylaw that I want to bring up here.
All right.
Yeah. This is a kind of mirroring what we just talked about. David, could the 7 by 7 bylaw be challenged constitutionally?
If you had a few $1 million and we're ready to go to the Supreme Court of Canada, I did challenge it constitutionally. I wrote a notice of constitutional question, and I lost that case. And so, was that a ridiculous thing, that having an amateur making factums and arguments in a appeals court case? No, I had to do it, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot making a factum and all the legal stuff, and it was reasonable, but they couldn't accept it.
Hmm.
And so, could it be constitutionally challenged? Yes, but it would need uh, an adamant dedication, like a decade of this is the only thing that's important in your life, sort of thing. Plus, high level people in fancy places and means and opportunity, because it's much more than an official thing in court. You're dealing with common public perceptions, and you're also dealing with uh, the crown, essentially.
Talk a bit to those. Can you speak a bit to those perceptions and how that impacted the case? Thank you, Krista.
Well, just the people make presumptions, common presumptions, just about homelessness, and they presume a inherent lack of discipline, and that's why people are on the street, and so they don't really need to be treated with a true presumption of innocence, and you just the common perceptions. It's get a job, just do it, and there are factors and variables that the naively frustrated aren't taking into account. And so it just leads to a suppression and a repression and an oppression of people who at some point saw no hope in their world, and so tried to do something else. And sometimes it had to do with burning bridges with substances and whatnot. Sometimes it was just, I'd rather be naked on the street with nothing than having a complete mental breakdown trying to make rent working 50 hours a week.
Very good point. And that's a good thing. There's such a wide range of people out there. Like, if you're like, your story is so unique, but there's other people too with very unique stories that exist in the street community. And that kind of speaks to the question that was asked around misconceptions facing the homeless community. And we only have a little bit of time here, so I want to speak a bit more beyond the right to sleep. You talked about the right to life that included sleep, air, food, and fair assumption. Can you speak a bit to that right to fair assumption?
Fair presumption. It's if you truly, truly don't know someone's character, and then you see them wearing a certain clothes or in a certain situation that you associate with a certain group or certain conditions, then you sometimes in our naivety make presumptions that that person's going to be like those people. But really, there's a reason why police, globally are told innocent presumption, because you don't know better. And so a grown-up human will go into a situation with strangers and in some fashion presume them to all be the coolest people that they could possibly ever meet, that they're going to be extra smart, extra nice, and just wonderful. And then as you find out more, you work from there. But to presume the best, that's sort of like the backbone of an enlightened culture.
Mm.
And also kind of like not getting it.
And it's kind of like the opposite of stigma. It's like they're a community or society that has stigma that is a pervading force. It's a community that has a fair assumption as a central principle.
Well, I'm sure we do on paper. I think as far as what people in their minds think Canada is, or the first world, that on paper somewhere there is something about presuming innocence.
And the last thing you spoke to, David, you spoke to community and the right to community. Can you speak to that?
a free community is bad for business. And so for some reason, community or community minded things where people gather all cost money now. Like going to a movie, going anywhere. And there just really isn't community. Like you see community in cultural associations from different countries and whatnot. They there's people gather there, and there's genuine community. But what you have in sort of Western culture is sort of a methadone version of community, where you're have to work so hard to get a little bit of taste of it. And like right now, the only community I've seen is in the homeless. Like there's a, even if people don't like me or think I'm arrogant or crazy or whatnot, I'm still the arrogant or crazy whatnot that's a part of that community. And so there is it's really nice and beautiful, like, and it just natural. It's interesting to watch, because just by the nature of everyone knowing who each other is, and being in that position for prolonged periods of time, you get to see all the little soap operas. You do your best to maintain the peace or whatnot, and so the community is just people gathering, but people gathering is frowned upon. Well, not talking even about COVID, but people gathering is the fomenting revolution or something like that. It's frowned upon.
And it's an interesting point you put up, because it's like the only option we have for community a lot of the time today is to pay for it. And what I think is really interesting about your perspective, both on tent cities and community, is that you don't view tent cities as a problem, you view them as a possible solution. And so I want to give you a second to talk a bit about, what does that tent city look like for you that is creating this future, this right to life?
Well, tent cities save the world. Like, people will see in the future that the only way we survive this without going full 1984 is because we embrace the idea of a community in tent cities before we have them forced upon us with fences around them. The tent cities are a dynamic thing. A tent city will grow and develop a life of its own, determined by the characters that are in it. Like, there will be obvious specific tent cities. There'll be a gardener tent city, or there'll be the frontline transient tent city, or there'll be a woman's only tent city. Like, that ultimately that welfare and the social assistance in those regards are just band-aids compared to the reality of a tent city is a true social safety net. If you have nowhere else to go, you always have a place to go. And so it just becomes a strange political ninja battle now, with dealing with sentiments and the allowance of whatever, the people caught in traps of rage and loneliness. Like, if we can offer people hope, then there's a chance. But until there's a hope beyond this mundane, money-dependent world, people are still gonna say F it and have no respect or consideration for people trying to make this mundane, money-dependent world continue to work. And now with COVID and a looming possibility of financial collapse, I think a lot of people are enjoying thinking bigger thoughts.
It's an important thing to think about. And I think that, it's really speaks to the policy decision happening from a place from people who haven't experienced it before as well. David, we're running really low on time here. I want to ask you, is there anything that you want to leave people with? What do you want people to take away from this interview if you had some kind of call for them?
Essentially, I would stress with all of my being, as poetically and graciously and articulately as possible, for people to think about the word patience. Like it's more than the stereotypical just a virtue. It's a literal mechanical door to wisdom. It's the only way we can see wisdom. Like without patience, there is no wisdom. And so everything in the world's going to be turned upside down. Everyone's going to be poor. The homeless situation is going to escalate like we've never imagined. And so with patience, we will find a stalwartness and wherewithal that will be able to face the harshest of futures. So patience, think about patience.
Great. Well, David, I wish we had more time to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here today. And I'm sure you and I will be in touch personally, and we'll talk again soon.
It seemed really short. That went by really fast. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, David.
Cool.
All right. So that was David Arthur Johnston. David is the pioneer, one of the pioneers, 9 pioneers in the right to sleep movement that gave people the right from a bylaw perspective here in Victoria to sleep overnight from 7 to 7. That precedent is now used across the Commonwealth. You've just heard from someone who spoke to the process of making change in the community by living through it. It's amazing how a human that had no money, no housing, just this will and this desire to be and create change and want justice really at the end of the day, was able to create that change. And it started for him at the municipal level. So right now, before you leave, if you want to make a difference in this community, the municipal level is where we can start. There are park bylaws that are currently being used right now to enforce this injunction to move people along. We would like to carry forth a call to action from the Poverty Kills 2020 team. You can check them out at povertykills2020.ca. Ask them for park bylaw reform, 24/7 right to shelter. We've created an email template in the comments that you can see. It'll be at the very top, pinned to the top. You can copy paste it and send an email to any of those emails below. We're looking at reform. We as a community can propel this forward. Victoria's already set a precedent, as you can see with David. This is a way of taking it further. So yeah, there will be time for you to do that. I want to bring it to a close. I realize we're a few minutes after, and I'm really sorry if we didn't manage to get to your question today. I promise you, if you keep tuning in, I will make sure to get to it. There's a lot to go through in a short amount of time. Thank you all for taking the time this evening to join 7 o'clock on a Wednesday. It's very sunny, as you could see, as I tried to shade myself midstream somewhat covertly. We're going to be speaking in 2 weeks with Lisa Helps, the mayor of Victoria. So that's going to be a much more open conversation where you're going to be able to ask questions. I'm going to be bringing forth some of the information that I've learned here today as far as what is the role of municipalities in creating bylaws that are humane and that can help support people regardless of their situation. And what does that look like in a modern context? So I hope you can join us. It's going to be in 2 weeks' time. If you or someone that you know is experiencing homelessness, man, that word is really getting me today, is experiencing homelessness, has lived experience working on the front line, or is involved some way interacting directly, we'd like to speak with them. You can email us here at info@theexistenceproject.ca. You can see it right there. Please, we're really open to stuff. We provide training beforehand around speaking, and I really like to build a relationship with people I'm talking to. So it'll be a long process, and I promise you, you'll feel supported throughout. If you want to see more updates from the project, live stream announcements, and the schedule of everything that's coming on here, you can follow us on facebook.com/theexistenceproject, on Instagram @theexistenceproject. Thank you very much to the audience again for coming. Amy Dove for her ongoing support of this project, Mira Matthew on the sidelines, Adam Farquharson, our website guy, and lastly, David Arthur Johnston. What an incredible human. What a change maker. What an example that we can all be, and we don't even need money to do it. So yeah, keep an eye out for our live stream in the next couple of weeks. And I hope you all have a blessed evening.